My name is Clark Stoeckley, and 2 years ago I stood right here discussing prankster artists in New York City and their playful interactions with police, all while pretending to be an NYPD officer. This morning I'd like to share with you the stories of 10 other artists who have been watched, interrogated, and detained or arrested due to suspicion of terrorism. Since I was last here, I developed the WikiLeaks truck, the first ever fake news van for the whistleblowing site WikiLeaks. I did this to bring attention to them, as well as the plight of Bradley Manning, the alleged source of over 250,000 cables, as well as a video entitled Collateral Murder, showing Apache helicopters flying around Baghdad, shooting down civilians, Reuters journalists, as well as rescue workers and children. I have had this van since March 19th of 2011. I drove it around the White House and was subsequently arrested by Secret Service, interrogated for 7 hours last fall, or fall before, 2011. I brought the truck up to New York and stationed it at Zuccotti Park for the entirety of Occupy Wall Street. Since then, I have expanded my fleet globally to include a race car, more vans, and an RV. Currently, I visit Bradley Manning at his trial in Fort Meade, Maryland, where I do courtroom sketches. I've been credentialed by the Pentagon, where they've done a background check on me, and I release these free to anyone to use under Creative Commons. Bradley Manning this month will be in jail for over 1,000 days without trial. His actual trial is expected to begin in June of this year. Bradley is being charged with 22 counts, including aiding the enemy, which carries a life sentence. So how does a Patriot Act? Well, in response to the events of September 11th, the Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism Act of 2001 was quickly drafted, passed by Congress, and signed by President George W. Bush 6 weeks later. This granted government questionably unconstitutional powers, including warrantless wiretapping and GPS tracking, indefinite detention of those without documentation, and national security layers containing gag orders. I remember this day vividly. I remember asking myself, so how does a Patriot Act? To answer that question, the late historian Howard Zinn argued that dissent is the highest form of patriotism. If patriotism means being true to the principles for which your country is supposed to stand, then certainly the right to dissent is one of those principles. One of the greatest mistakes is to think that patriotism means support from for your government. And that view of patriotism ignores the founding principles of the country expressed in the Declaration of Independence, which makes it clear that governments are artificial creations set up to achieve certain ends. The first artist I would like to talk about is Tufan Elahi. Born in Bangladesh and raised in New York, he's currently an associate professor at the University of Maryland and director of the Digital Cultures and Creativities Honors Program. In 2002, he was suspected of hoarding explosives in a Florida storage unit. He was detained at Detroit Airport returning from Senegal. The owners of the storage facility, where he rented a locker, had wrongly informed authorities on September 12, 2001 that an Arab man had fled the country, leaving explosives behind. 6 months of FBI interrogation and 9 polygraph tests later, he was cleared for travel. But just to make sure he didn't miss any flights, he informed the FBI whenever he flew, which started with constant phone calls and emails to notify them of his whereabouts, grew into an open-ended art project, publicly documenting his life, minute by minute, on trackingtransients.net. Hotel rooms, train stations, airports, grocery stores, meals, beds, receipts, toilets, loading his site with thousands of stamped images. He also carries a GPS tracking device that tracks his movements on a live Google map. Speaking about his surveillance, he claims that the best way to protect privacy is to give it away. By putting everything out there about me, I'm simultaneously telling everything and nothing about my life. He is motivated partly because he did not want to go through the same experience again, but he also has a desire to hold a mirror to the agencies that spy on us and overload them with information. Steve Kurtz is a professor of art at SUNY Buffalo and a founding member of the Critical Art Ensemble. May 2004, his wife Hope Kurtz sadly passed away from congenital heart failure. Preparing for an exhibit at Mass MoCA about genetically modified food, they had a small biological lab with harmless specimens in their home. Buffalo police investigating her death deemed these materials suspicious and quickly notified the FBI. Kurtz was detained for a day without charge on suspicion of bioterrorism. Federal agents in hazmat suits raided his home, seizing books, computers, manuscripts, and art supplies. Kurtz was not allowed to return home for a full week. After the New York State Commissioner of Public Health determined that nothing posed any sort of threat to public or environmental health, and Hope had died of natural causes. Although the bioterrorism charges were dropped, Kurtz and Dr. Robert Farrell, professor of genetics at the University of Pittsburgh Graduate School of Public Health and scientific consultant for the Critical Art Ensemble, were indicted on mail and wire fraud charges, despite the lack of any evidence of fraud. This related to the way Kurtz and Farrell allegedly ordered and mailed $256 worth of non-pathogenic bacteria. Under the Patriot Act, the maximum possible sentence for these charges increased from 5 to 20 years. This was the first time ever that the Department of Justice intervened in an alleged breach of material transfer agreement of non-hazardous materials, so to redefine it as a criminal offense. To make light of the whole ordeal, in 2008, Kurtz's seized exhibit, he filled a gallery with masks, filters, hazmat suits, gloves, pizza boxes, Gatorade bottles, caution tape, investigation notes, and to-do lists that the agents left behind in his house. The story of his case is depicted in the film Strange Culture by filmmaker Lynn Hirschman-Leeson, which premiered at Sundance International Film Festival in 2007. Kurtz's indictment was later ruled insufficient on its face, meaning that even if the actions alleged in the indictment were true, they did not constitute a crime. Coming on in defense of Steve Kurtz included the Yes Men, anti-corporate pranksters Igor Vamos and Jacques Savan. The two created a parody website called DowEthics.com, which was mistaken for the real Dow Chemical website by the BBC, who invited them onto a segment concerning the 20th anniversary of the Bhopal, India disaster, the largest chemical catastrophe in history, killing tens of thousands and leaving hundreds of thousands requiring lifelong medical care. Jock, better known as Andy Bicklbaum, appeared on BBC World as Jude Finisterra, claiming that Dow planned to liquidate Union Carbide and use the $12 billion in profits to pay for medical care, site remediation, and fund product research. Dow's share price fell 4% in 20 minutes, cutting $2 billion off the market value. Dow issued a press release denying the statement, but this only kept the story in the headlines. After the hoax was revealed, in a follow-up interview, an interviewer claimed that there were many people in tears in Bhopal. Last February, WikiLeaks published millions of hacked emails from Austin, Texas-based private intelligence firm Stratfor. The email leak proved that Dow Chemical Company hired them to monitor the Yes Men and closely follow these activists around the 25th anniversary of the disaster. One of those, a week later, 6 people in the U.S. and U.K. were indicted for email leak, including Chicago activist Jeremy Hammond, who was entrapped by the FBI. Next is Laura Poitras, who was introduced to me by Andy Bicklbaum. In 2006, Laura was nominated for an Academy Award for her film My Country, My Country. Alone, she embedded herself for over 8 months with average Iraqi families during the U.S. occupation. In this film, she featured a medical doctor turned Sunni political candidate. Shortly thereafter, Poitras was assigned the most dangerous rating possible on the Department of Homeland Security's terrorist watch list. This made flying very difficult. Since then, Laura has been harassed and detained for hours and days at over 40 border crossings. Each time she was heavily interrogated, and at times border agents seized her computers, cell phones, and notes. She was even threatened with exile from the United States. Journalist Glenn Greenwald and a group of fellow film directors petitioned the government to apologize and to correct this wrongdoing. But it got worse. After she premiered The Oath at the 2010 Sundance Festival, in which she showcased the stories of a former bodyguard and a former driver for Osama bin Laden. She traveled to Yemen and to Guantanamo Bay Prison to document the first of the controversial military commissions. The harassment Laura received on her travels prompted her to shift her focus on how the war on terror increasingly targets Americans through surveillance, covert activities, and attacks on whistleblowers. The program, published on August 22, 2012, by the New York Times, is a preview of the third documentary in this trilogy, coming out this year. She followed Bill Binney, a former mathematician for the National Security Agency, who resigned just days after Bush signed the Patriot Act. He became a whistleblower, revealing that the program he had designed for foreign espionage was to be converted into a machine for spying on U.S. citizens. He explained that a facility being built in Bluffdale, Utah, is intended for domestic surveillance, the world's largest storage of data collected from all of our communications. This past spring, she hosted a surveillance teach-in as part of the Whitney Biennial. She invited Binney, an anonymity expert and founder of the Tor Project, Jacob Applebaum. There, Applebaum released a list of fusion centers that were jointly created between 2003 and 2007 under the newly formed Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice to promote information sharing at a federal level between agencies, the defense, state and municipal governments, as well as private contractors. Next artist is Duke Riley. Brooklyn-based, he pursues an alternative view of hidden borderlands and their inhabitants through drawing, printmaking, mosaic, sculpture, performative interventions, and video. He earned his BFA from Rhode Island School of Design and MFA in sculpture from Pratt Institute. Originally a tattoo artist from Boston, Riley moved to New York City in '96, where he began exhibiting and carrying out a series of water-based interventions. 2007, in a piece called After the Battle of Brooklyn, Riley re-examined a failed attempt by the Continental Army to sink a British ship in the New York harbor during the American Revolution. So Riley built a replica of a small wooden Revolutionary War submarine known as the Turtle. He maneuvered his submarine past security zone of the Queen Mary II luxury cruise ship docked in Red Hook. Riley was spotted by the U.S. Coast Guard, arrested by the NYPD, and detained for questioning by FBI under suspicion of terrorism. New media artist Wafa Bilal was prohibited from studying art in his homeland of Iraq. Rather, he was forced to study geology, just like Roy Orbison at North Texas State. In the early 90s, Bilal refused to participate in the invasion of Kuwait and instead organized protests. He was arrested for art criticizing Saddam Hussein. After his release in '91, he fled to Saudi Arabia, teaching art to children in refugee camps, before immigrating to the United States to study art at the University of New Mexico and the School of Art of the Art Institute of Chicago. Sadly, Wafa's brother was killed by a U.S. missile strike at a checkpoint, deepening his condemnation of Operation Iraqi Freedom. 2008, as part of a residency at RPI, he created an interactive video art piece titled Night of Bush Capturing, Virtual Jihadi, in which he hacked the Al-Qaeda game Quest for Bush, which itself was a hacked version of the popular U.S. video game Quest for Saddam. In Wafa's modified version, he cast himself as a suicide bomber sent on a mission to assassinate Bush. The artwork was meant to bring attention to the vulnerability of Iraqi civilians to the travesties of the current war and to expose the racist generalizations of profiling. Controversy ensued in Troy, and the college Republicans called the arts department a safe haven for terrorists on their blog. The RPI administration canceled the exhibit, and the show had to relocate to another venue off campus. But as you can imagine, news of this video game attracted quite a bit of attention with federal agents who attended and interrogated Bilal. After the show was shut down at RPI, increased security measures were taking place all over the campus. The next artist I'd like to talk to you about is a personal friend of mine. Vlad Teichberg is a Princeton dropout and former derivatives trader who became alarmed by the Patriot Act. He retired early to devote his time to documenting police brutality at protests. I joined Vlad at the 2008 Republican National Convention in St. Paul, Minnesota, and just before I arrived, he and 2 members of his media team, the Glass Bead Collective, were detained by police without reason, and all of their cameras and computers were seized without any documentation. Realizing that we were being watched, we made copies of all tapes we shot that week, sealed the originals in envelopes, and labeled them as evidence, and set up live-stream security cameras in our studio. After the convention, police arrived to illegally raid our studio, but left after they realized that they would be recorded tampering with evidence. Using a high luminosity projector, Vlad has also beamed video images onto government and corporate buildings all across New York and D.C. Though he's been hassled by the police, our lawyer Wiley Stoeckley has been always present to inform the police that there is no law against projections. Vlad introduced me to WikiLeaks, and he was the first to ride in my truck, live streaming my arrest by the Secret Service in front of the White House. It was then that Vlad discussed plans for Occupy. But in the meantime, he moved to Madrid and to document the indignitos who were protesting economic conditions and holding general assemblies in Puerta del Sol Square. He returned to New York with a new wife, and the 2 began organizing a live streaming network called Global Revolution, were the first streamers in Zuccotti Park on September 17th. For the first few weeks, Global Revolution operated from under tarps using wireless hotspots. But as the Occupy movement spread globally, Vlad negotiated with Livestream Corporation for free professional accounts for all occupations. Vlad grew tired of the rain and the theft at Liberty Park, so he moved his operation to studios in NoHo and Bushwick, where he could mix hundreds of channels 24 hours a day. But the NYPD finally caught up with him and as Brooklyn studio, and they bribed his landlords and a motorcycle gang to force him out of the space. When he refused to leave, he was arrested. Takeshi Miyakawa was born in Japan, studied architecture in Tokyo, and moved to New York in '89 to become a model maker for architect Raphael Vignoli. Now he owns a furniture design studio business in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. He models his cabinetry after Rubik's Cubes, fractals, and public housing complexes. His chair designs have evolved into pieces that are more functional as lighting than as a seat. Last year, he began temporarily installing LED-lit chairs in public spaces for photographs. To publicize his work at the International Contemporary Furniture Fair in May last year, he hung white, glowing I Heart New York bags from lampposts and trees in Brooklyn. Almost immediately, the installation attracted attention, though probably not the kind he hoped. His installations prompted a call to the police bomb squad about a suspicious package attached to a tree. 2 blocks of Bedford Avenue were shut down and evacuated, and he was arrested while atop his ladder. He was charged with reckless endangerment and placing a false bomb or hazardous substance. After spending a night in the horrid Brooklyn Central Booking Group holding cell, his judge at arraignment ordered him to be held at Rikers Island for a month, pending a psychological evaluation. Design Boom, a website devoted to the design and architecture, posted a free Takeshi petition that quickly accrued thousands of signatures. Several artists, designers, and architects wrote character references that his lawyer delivered to the judge. Luckily, he was released after 5 days. And the final artist I'd like to talk to you about this morning is 29-year-old Assam Attia. He's a former geospatial analyst who served in Iraq and is an art school graduate from Maine. Over 3 days, coinciding with the convening of the last UN General Assembly in September, Attia replaced more than 100 telephone booth advertisements in Manhattan with mock public service ads showing the NYPD using drones to monitor and kill citizens. He claims his military training helped him work swiftly and go unnoticed in Times Square. That and a white van sporting a large Van Wagner decal and a yellow strobe light. His intention was to create a conversation about the disturbing trends in police surveillance, alluding to recent efforts by the Department of Homeland Security to facilitate and accelerate the adoption of unmanned aerial drones by local police departments. The NYPD used special forensics and an anti-terrorism unit to track down Assam at his apartment in December. He has been charged with grand larceny, possession of stolen property, and 56 counts of criminal possession of a forged instrument. He posted bail, which was set at $10,000 bond or $2,500 cash, and still has an ongoing case in Manhattan criminal court. Thank you very much. Glad you came out this morning.